some discussion today. And again, I welcome your discussion in Portuguese if you would prefer, or English, either way. We are talking about how to get started with blended learning, survival skills for blended learning. Much of our conversation will draw from the book Blended, Using Disruptive Innovation to Improve School, which I co-authored with Michael Horn from the Clayton Christensen Institute. How are we doing with learning right now during the pandemic? We know that millions of children around the world are falling behind, that they are not getting access to education opportunities. But some children are doing well today with their learning. Some children have good homeschool setups. So they have a parent or another caregiver, and they have the technology or resources that they need to continue learning even from home. Some students have joined learning pods, so small groups with a paid facilitator or teacher who is operating a tiny school out of a home. And those are emerging around the globe in the face of school closures. How about schools themselves? Some schools have been able to adjust to pandemic learning. Silicon Schools Fund is a research and school investment group based in California. And they studied several schools to see how they were doing with adjusting to the pandemic. And they wanted to know which schools were able to preserve the learning experience for their students. And they researched these schools and determined that there were two variables that made the biggest difference for whether schools were able to adjust quickly to the incredibly unusual circumstances our world is in today. And the first variable that they determined was important was technology. Does the school have access to technology? Do students have access to a computer and the internet? Do the teachers know how to use the technology? That was a big variable that helped determine whether or not the schools were able to adjust to the pandemic. And then the second was school culture. Does the school have a culture of teamwork? Do the staff know how to work together? Do they have a mentality of, I can figure this out? And digging down even deeper, the researchers found that the one variable that made the very most difference was school culture. So the schools that had a strong culture, the schools with a staff that knew how to work together, have weathered the pandemic the very best. So if you had to choose one thing for schools to help them be successful right now in these unusual times, I would choose school culture. A great leader combined with a staff that's flexible and willing to grow and willing to change. And then secondly, having some tools, having some technology sure has helped. So let's talk a little bit about culture, and then we will talk a bit about technology. How do we create a culture that's successful in modern times? My vision for schools is that we create a culture where every child can learn, regardless of circumstance. So if the child is sick, if the child is moving, if the child has a special need, if there's a pandemic, if the child has a special gift, regardless of circumstances, every child can learn. How do we create that kind of a school system? Well, one starting point for creating the culture is to start with your mindset. Start by choosing your mindset. This screenshot is from a Twitter post that a teacher posted at the beginning of the pandemic. And it was a teacher in America, and I think it shows how many teachers were feeling as the world started to shift and change. And she said that this is how she felt. Administrators in 2020 are telling her, please be prepared to teach online, in person, both simultaneously, on a moving train, while juggling, in a burning building, under the sea, during a wrestling match with the T-Rex, as a hologram, and riding a unicorn. Also, be safe and we value you. That's how a lot of teachers were feeling as schools asked them to change so quickly and adapt to new circumstances. It was hard for teachers. And as we think about shifting the way we do school, it can be hard. Why is it hard? Big changes to daily routines feel deeply emotional and difficult for most people. That is just a fact of human nature. Why? Why do big changes feel deeply emotional and difficult for most people? One reason is the fear of losing something of value. We fear that if we change our schools, we will lose something of value. The picture you see here is one of my colleagues' sons. He took a picture of his son doing online learning, and his son had fallen asleep. And one of our fears is that we will move to a new type of learning that's not as good, where the students are not as engaged, where they have a screen and no humanity. So we fear losing something of value. A second reason for the deep emotion we might be feeling right now is that we fear not being able to adapt to the new ways. We worry that we won't be able to make the changes. We won't have what it takes to be able to make the changes. A third reason is that humans have a need for certainty. We want to know that we'll be safe and secure. And so in uncertain times, or as we think about changing our schools, we feel insecure. One opportunity to get the culture right is to choose a mindset that will help us move into the future more successfully. So one mindset that is successful for educators is this one. I can see adversity as a means for improvement, not as something that holds me back. I am powerful enough to overcome unexpected challenges. Is it possible to accept a new belief like that? I'm going to show you a few ideas about the future that's available to us. And as you listen to my ideas, I want you to think about what is the right mindset for you. Is it a mindset of fear and insecurity? Or can you experiment with a mindset that's open to a new way of thinking about what schools could be? I'm going to change the way I'm sharing screen so that you can hear the video. Hold on just a minute. Share sound. Okay, now you should be able to hear the video. Rodrigo, will you please stop me if the video is not playing correctly so I don't waste your time? Okay, so let me show you this video and it will give you some ideas of what school could be as we move into the future.
Blended learning combines online instruction with traditional schooling, where students have some control over when, how, and where they learn.
I just love doing computers because it's fun. I'm learning a lot in math and in reading.
With 35-year-olds and having 10 on computers and 10 doing work and 10 with teachers was really different, but I love it. Oh, what's the word? Came, very good. This would be camp. It's really great and you're able to take a group of 5 kids, differentiate it, make sure it's at their level, and get kids to learn the skills that they need to be independent readers by the end of kindergarten, which is just amazing to see. How do you know that the sunlight does not touch the carrots?
We do what's called flip lessons. We have our classwork done at home and our homework done in class.
40, 46.
I knew that there would be a chance to have a lot of small group time with kids, and that's something that I love.
A tanagram is many shapes that are put together in a way to create something, and it can be put together in any way. So it will print on the cardboard.
So each month they take an assessment through iStation. As teachers, we're able to view those results as well and see where percentile ranking they are, see what areas they're struggling with.
Like you try to get Gigi, he's a penguin, back to his own iceberg.
I'm so close, like this close.
So you're not just getting Gigi to his iceberg, but at the same time, you're learning more math.
So let's talk a bit more about what does it really mean to move towards more of a blended learning as we think about the future. One critical idea is that blended learning is not the same thing as technology-rich instruction. Oftentimes, teachers confuse blended learning with a classroom that's filled with technology, and that's not necessarily the case. Your classroom might have electronic smartboards. Your students might even all have their own laptop. And that still is not necessarily blended learning. I would call this a technology-rich classroom, but not necessarily a blended classroom. In a blended classroom, students need to have control over their own learning. So they need to be able to access the right lesson at the right time in the right way for them. In this classroom, the teacher still is in control. The teacher is the primary lecturer. The teacher is delivering the instruction. In a blended classroom, the students develop more personal agency, free agency, the ability to make choices over their own learning. In a blended classroom, students have more choice over the pathway that they take, the pace that they work, and in many cases, where they work. And so in extreme moments like a pandemic, blended learning allows for flexibility. So it's easier for the students to learn from home or from school. In less extreme circumstances, blended learning is still a gift for students because it gives them opportunity to control their own learning, to drive their own learning. If there's one thing I hope you already are learning from our time together today, it's do not confuse blended learning with technology-rich instruction. If you go into a classroom where there are multiple electronic devices, check and see how much control the students have. If the teacher is still delivering one lesson to the entire class and the students are using their devices almost like a pencil and paper, then that is technology rich, but it is not blended learning. Today, we will focus on the flex model of blended learning. There are other models of blended learning you might be familiar with, the rotation model, the a la carte model, the enriched virtual model. Today, we will focus on the flex model of blended learning. And the reason for that is that the flex model is the most useful right now for students who need to be able to go back and forth between learning from home and learning from school. I wish that every student were in a flex model right now because they would be able to continue learning even when schools are closed. And as we look to the future, the flex model is a wonderful model to consider because it allows students to keep learning in any circumstance. The definition of a flex model is a model where online learning is the backbone of content and instruction. So students are depending on online learning to access the lesson and to deliver their assignments. Meanwhile, there's a teacher that's still in charge of those students and supports the students in a variety of ways. In some classrooms, you see the teacher meeting one-on-one with students. In other classrooms, you see the teacher leading a small group discussion or a seminar. There are a variety of things that the teacher does to improve the learning experience for the students. Let's watch what a flex model looks like. This is an example from Kuala Lumpur in Malaysia. I want you to just see what a flex model sounds like. So listen to these students describe how they control their own learning experience.
We gather at the carpet for circle time, and at circle time we inspire them, we empower them to get them started and pumped up for the day. After that, they will break off to set their goals for the core skills time or for the day or for the week, and then they will all get on with their core skills for the day.
So we have this place where we set our goals. It's called a journey tracker. So we type in what our goals are for today. Like for mathematics, I click on mathematics. There's many different types of math, so I click on which one I want to do.
We spend about 1.5 hours on core skills working on reading, writing, spelling, and math.
I've learned how to be intentional by myself and how to learn by myself and trying to get independent. That's what it's all about. Children can learn from each other. Older children can learn from younger children, and younger children can learn from older children.
So that's a quick glimpse of one flex model. In a flex classroom, we want to build something more like the picture on the left than on the picture on the right. So we want to build something more where the students are, you see in the picture on the left, you see some students are working online, some are working with each other, some have a paper and pencil. One boy there is working on the floor. That's where he feels the most comfortable. There's engagement, there's humanity, there's connection. It's a dynamic environment where the learners are doing the right activity at the right time in the right way for them. In the picture on the right, the students are plugged into a machine. And that's not what we're aiming for with a flex model. We're aiming for an environment where there's an adaptation for the needs of each learner and they work together and it's a dynamic environment. This is Kelly Kasuga. She teaches Algebra 1 at a school in California, and she participated in a pilot test, and I was the author that was in charge of describing what I observed in her pilot test. And she wanted to convert a traditional Algebra 1 classroom to a classroom that was a flex model. And she had 40 students in her Algebra 1 class. These were ninth grade students, so they were starting their secondary school experience. And it was mostly a Hispanic group of students. And this is what her classroom looked like after she made the change to a flex model. I want you to notice a few things about her classroom. One is, can you find Kelly? Where is Kelly? If you look carefully, you'll see, and I'm not sure if you can see my cursor, but she is in the middle, sitting at one of the desks, working with the students. She is not teaching from the front of the classroom. In a flex model, you can't tell where the front of the classroom is. It's hard to even tell where it is because the shift changes. So the teacher is now working one-on-one with students. Some of the students are at the whiteboard working on their problems. Many of the students are working together in teams. They're working collaboratively. They're using the online platform to help them get the right lesson at the right time for them. It looks different from a traditional classroom. It was not machine learning. It was very much based on relationships. In fact, one of the things Kelly liked the best about it was that it freed up her time to meet one-on-one with each student. She had 40 students in her classroom, and she met with every single student in that classroom 3 times a week individually. Think back to when you were in school. How often did you meet one-on-one with your teacher to get individual coaching. I almost never did. It didn't happen. In the traditional model, it's almost impossible for a teacher to do that because the teacher has to be at the front of the classroom delivering the lecture. In a classroom like this, the teacher's time is freed up for the humanity, for the individual connection and coaching. Listen to some of the things her students said about her at the end of the pilot test. This shows how much they felt like they connected with her. They said things like, she motivates with extreme happiness. She always makes me feel like I can do anything. She tells me not to give up. She is very supportive. She is very caring. She is always saying we can do things. There is never a time she said anything along the lines of, you cannot do this. Me da poder. I love these things that they said. So my invitation to you is to choose your mindset intentionally. Unwanted thoughts include, this is all loss, no gain. I have no idea how to do this. Our world is falling apart. Those are unwanted thoughts. What replacement thought could you practice to think about the opportunity ahead for our students as we shift to new ways of teaching and learning? If you're struggling, try beginning the sentence with the sentence stem. It's possible that, so you could begin by saying, it's possible that a more flexible model could bring some benefits to our students. Or it's possible that teachers will enjoy teaching more when they have time to connect with each student individually. So I'd like to ask you to share right now. And Rodrigo, if you would translate for me if necessary, what is a mindset that you could choose as we think about changing our schools for the future of learning?
Se quiserem falar, pessoal, a gente traduz para vocês, caso precisem, tá bem?
Let me try. And our mindset is exactly what you are expecting. We know and we are convinced that it's possible that we can make a big difference by using blended learning attached with a very strong platform and a very strong digital data that we do have in our system. And it is, of course, very difficult, as you said in your presentation. We need to change the perception of the people, students, teachers, managers, and so forth, of this movement, this path to the future. This is the most difficult thing, because people will think really that, well, we are so much tied up with the past. We did so much investment, investment in technology. We have no idea how to come from the present status to the future. So our mindset in the company is really that it's possible to move from today's status to a future that is much more flexible, as you presented. That's my opinion, Heather.
Thank you, Oswaldo. That was a beautiful mindset that you shared. And I liked how you started with it's possible that. That was good. Who else will share? Don't be shy. And please speak in your native language if you would prefer. I would rather speak in my native language, so.
Ok. Alguém mais, pessoal? Vocês entenderam a pergunta? Tá todo mundo na mesma página?
Gabriela, talvez pudesse falar alguma coisa.
Alguém gostaria de dividir alguma coisa? Rafael, José, Juliana, Gabriela. Tá mutado, peraí.
Pronto. Preferencialmente vou falar em português. Eu não sei exatamente se eu entendi a pergunta, se você puder repetir.
Ela quer saber o mindset, que
A
você...
mentalidade.
Oi? A mentalidade, isso, que vocês têm sobre essa educação, é o que é preciso para a mudança, a sua visão sobre a educação. Muito do que a gente discutiu, Gabriela.
Eu acho que a professora traz elementos importantes, né, para a gente pensar. Eu penso que dentro da área de educação nós já avançamos bastante, pensando no aluno como centro do processo. Para alguns educadores ainda é difícil fazer essa relação do uso da tecnologia, né, e das possibilidades de como você entende o aluno como autor da sua construção de conhecimento. Se você quiser falar isso para ela até agora, e depois eu continuo.
Gabriela said that you brought special thoughts here today, and here in Brazil, especially, we have moved forward in this thought by putting the student in the center of the process. It is hard in some realities we have here, but we are in this road, and we have to help. We talk about that, Heather, when we met. Gabriela is one of our teachers in our team, responsible for this part of the job, to work with the schools and to work with the teachers. So we have this kind of mentality here in Brazil, but it's not spread, and that's what we want to do.
Wonderful. Thank you for sharing that. And I hope it will spread. I know it will. And that we are at the beginning of a process that the pandemic has made move more quickly. But it was already underway even before the pandemic, a process of updating our schools, a process of using the innovations that are available to us to create a more flexible model where students have more control of their own learning. We were already moving in that direction. Yeah. Now we know it's important.
But I think, Heather, if I may, there's this in Brazil we call vestibular. It's a test that the students do by the end of their high school period. It's a hard time for our students, for schools, and we have to break this old mentality that new conceptions of education, new methodologies do not support this period. So this is the Brazilian scenario. We have to convince all the schools that the blended learning works, the technology, make the people get together. And as I saw in your presentation, the teacher in the process and not in front of the class. So we are moving in this direction, and our team, it's really engaged in this idea.
It's exciting. It's very exciting, and an entire ecosystem needs to develop to make it possible. So you are providing part of the ecosystem with your technology platform. Students need devices. There needs to be dependable electricity. We are fighting today. So there are many parts of the ecosystem which we need to make this work, but we're getting there. We are getting there, and poco a poco we get there. So let's talk about how do we prioritize some of the next steps. I want to speak for a moment about the pandemic again, only because it's very real right now to everyone, and we are not through with it yet. Yes.
I think Marcel had some thoughts to share. Marcel, você queria falar alguma coisa?
Marcele?
Uh-oh, I can't hear you.
Você está mute?
Sally, can you hear us?
No. Okay, go ahead, and we'll come back to Marcela later. Go ahead, Heather, please.
Okay, Marcel, go ahead. Keep your device on not on mute, and so you can keep trying to make your microphone work. And once we hear you, then we'll jump back to you.
Thank you.
So, how do we prioritize? Oh, I'm getting some feedback now. I guess we better mute you.
I think she's having some problems with her mic.
Okay, I'm gonna mute you, Marcel. I'm sorry, but otherwise, I hear an echo. So, I was riding on the subway train in London, and at the base of the subway train, it says, mind the gap. And that means notice the gap between the train and the platform and don't fall into that gap. And I was thinking about how many students right now are not getting on the train for learning. They are falling into the gap. Most educators are familiar with Abraham Maslow. In 1943, he published his hierarchy of needs. And he said and identified that humans are motivated to solve for their physiological needs before they care about much anything else. So they need food, shelter, water, clothes. Once their physiological needs are met, then they're motivated to solve for their safety needs. So emotional security, financial security. Having met those needs, then they feel motivated to solve for social belonging needs. So do they have companionship? Do they have family? Do they feel belonging? Only after they solve for all of those basic needs are most humans ready to seek for esteem and self-actualization. So most humans want physiological safety, social belonging, before they care about recognition, before they care about attention, before they care about feeling of accomplishment. At the beginning of a pandemic, in the United States at least, maybe it was different in Brazil, many schools hurried to solve for the highest levels of this pyramid. They said, how do we help our kids keep learning during the pandemic? And it was a mistake because the base of the pyramid had been taken away from many of these students. Many of these students no longer had access to the food that they get at school. They didn't feel emotionally or physically safe anymore. They didn't feel connected to each other, so their social belonging needs weren't met. And schools immediately said, how do we provide continuity of learning at this high level instead of worrying about those bottom levels? So my first recommendation is it's important during the pandemic to pause and think about what individual student needs are for blended learning or for any type of learning. And so the wisest schools are stopping to gather a complete picture of the student gaps, make a plan to close those gaps, and communicating with school leaders around other gaps that they might be able to fill. At this school, in this picture, teachers stopped teaching and used their time to help distribute meals to students who otherwise would be hungry. I just want to point this out because some schools say, my students aren't learning anything. And very likely the problem could be Maslow's hierarchy of needs and some students who, if they're hungry, if they're too lonely, if they feel unsafe, they won't be motivated to learn. We all know this, but it's worth remembering as we think about prioritizing right now. The next priority is to build relationships with individual students. So as we envision the future of schooling, we want to shift away from the idea that the teacher is at the front of the classroom delivering the lecture, and instead shift to a mentality of the teacher meeting individually with students to give them feedback, to give them coaching, to build the relationship, to express their love, to meet one-on-one and help those students make progress. That we can use technology to help the rest of the class learn without the teacher delivering the lesson anymore. So we're shifting to building relationships with individual students. In the best companies, In the best organizations, this is what managers do. They spend their time giving feedback to their employees. We should be doing the same thing in our schools. That's how we take our human population to the next level, is by giving individual feedback to each person. That's how we help them grow, more than by giving them more lectures. The third priority is to shift to a more flex model of blended learning. And we would need more time together to really talk about all of the different ways to shift to a flex model. But let me just show you this picture of the rocket to give you a basic idea. So imagine a rocket that launches into space and then completes its mission and then lands back down on Earth. That's how to think about a flex model. In a flex model, the teacher meets with the students in a group discussion to launch those learners into their work. So if you look at this middle row here, the students begin with a group discussion. Next, they start their independent work, and this uses an online platform. So the students work with an online platform to know what the lesson is, to watch the video, to do the app, to do the game, to do the learning challenge, to complete their assignment, to interact with software. They might also do a collaborative project. So they'll meet with a team to do project-based learning, to do deep inquiry, to ask a real-world question and try to solve it. And then after they have done their independent and collaborative work, then the rocket lands back on Earth again with a group discussion where they reflect on what they just did. Meanwhile, look at this top row. What is the teacher doing during a flex model? The teacher also begins her day with a group discussion to launch the learners into their work. And then while the students are doing the independent and collaborative work, the teacher is doing one-on-one check-ins. So you can see how this model frees up the teacher's time to meet one-on-one with each student. And then she ends that segment with another group discussion. You can do a blended learning arc each week. So you start the week this way and end. You can do it each day. So you start the day and then end. You can even just do it within each block. So you maybe would do a 2-hour instructional block that begins with a group discussion, and then independent and collaborative work, and then ends with reflection, and then you have lunch, and then you do it again. So this is the basic rhythm of a flex blended learning model. And as we start to plan for the future of schools in Brazil, I invite you to consider moving towards this model instead of our traditional model. The fourth priority is to establish norms of engagement in blended environments. So with your students, co-create norms for video conferencing, group discussion, and digital citizenship, and then revisit norms until they become a dependable part of your shared culture. We cannot expect our students to immediately start doing group discussions without any training on how to do them successfully. So teachers and students work together to create norms, to create rules of engagement for how they plan to work together in those group discussions. And also when they're online, students need norms to think about how do they choose appropriate things to be doing online? What do they do if something inappropriate pops up on their screen while they're working online? What do they do if they want to watch YouTube instead of doing their online assignment? All of those questions, students need to learn how to engage in a 21st century environment. And so it's important for teachers and students to spend time at the beginning thinking about what should all of these types of learning experiences look like, and what are we agreeing to do as a community in order to make them successful. This is true whether the learning is happening face-to-face or remotely. The fifth priority is to engage parents. Parents need to know how the school is changing. Parents need to know how students can continue learning. Parents need to understand and buy into your efforts. So the schools that are doing this work well spend a lot of time working with parents as partners along the journey. And then the last priority I will mention today is to onboard students to blended learning. Teach students the technical literacy skills they'll need. Help students select and practice new habits of success. So they'll need to learn habits of how do they open their laptop? How do they get started on their work? How do they work collaboratively with their peers successfully? And then support students who struggle to onboard. Some students will immediately get it. They will be so good at controlling their own learning. Other students will struggle. I have 5 children. My 4th child, he is 11 years old, and he is in a school like this, and it is hard for him to get organized and open his laptop and get his work done. Some of my other children, it's easier for them. They just have those executive functioning skills to be able to do it more successfully. So we'll know that some students will need more help in order to thrive in an environment like this, where students have a lot of agency to drive their own learning. So those are the ideas I have for you. I want to spend the last 10 minutes responding to any questions you have, or just discussing any of these ideas. We've talked about beginning with Maslow's hierarchy of needs and remembering that it's important to help students fulfill their physiological, safety, and social needs before we think about blended learning. But then as we start to advance to the point of blended learning, one way to consider structuring it as a blended learning arc. That's a good way to think about getting started with a flex model. So let me turn it to you for any reactions you have, any questions you have, and we'll save the last few minutes for that.
Thank you, Heather. And I will jump again into the discussion. And I'd like to share with you and everybody here that the way we thought about blended learning is learning from your books and the discussions internally, is to bring exactly what to express that the teacher is on the background. So the system is also, our system, our platform helps each student individually and provide information and data to the teacher in order to help each one in every day. If we had time, I don't think we have to today, I would make a very quick presentation through our CTO, make a very quick presentation, and just to show a little bit of our platform in 2 or 3 minutes, if it will help.
I would love to see it if everyone else agrees to that.
Okay, good. So I'm asking Fabio to jump in and show a little bit of our taste of our platform. Fábio, se você puder apresentar pouco da plataforma, fazer uma descrição para que ela possa compreender e os outros também o verem. O Fábio está aí?
Está aí.
Desculpe, eu estava com o microfone mutado. Se eu compartilhar minha tela. Rodrigo, eu não tenho possibilidade de compartilhar minha tela.
Como é que ele consegue, Rodrigo?
Está marcado aqui que o anfitrião desativou o compartilhamento da tela.
Agora.
Agora sim.
Esse anfitrião é duro, hein?
Ele não quer que a gente mostre nada.
Nós temos uma pergunta, só depois da apresentação, do Rafael.
Perfeito. Senhores, o que vocês estão vendo ainda há algumas coisas nele que são de desenvolvimento, mas eu vou mostrar para vocês basicamente o que o aluno veria. Tá? Se eu, obviamente, vou mudar.
Boa tarde, Fábio. Tocando de mato. Bem-vindo de volta ao Ilute.
Uma preocupação que nós tivemos é que quando o aluno entra em algo que ele escolhe, até foi uma coisa que eu ouvi uma das menininhas num vídeo falando, né, que ela escolhe matemática, qual matemática ela quer e etc. Então, aqui ele tem a opção de escolher o que ele quer, obviamente, para a série dele, ou para aquilo que o colégio determinar como grade daquele aluno. Ele vai ter todo o conteúdo encadeado e sempre um conteúdo multimídia. Então, ele pode ter, obviamente, textos, ele pode ter vídeos, né, como aqui tem um, não vou deixar ele tocando, e algumas coisas, inclusive, que nós nos preocupamos duplamente. Uma foi com acessibilidade e a outra foi que o aluno pode, eventualmente, querer... eu vou usar o termo assistir aula, mas acompanhar o que ele tem que fazer digitalmente, às vezes ele pode fazer isso com um fone de ouvido. Então, todas as aulas são dotadas de um módulo que permite que elas sejam lidas.
Em geometria, cônicas são as curvas geradas ou encontradas na intersecção de um plano que atravessa um cone. Em uma superfície afunilada, existem 3 tipos de cortes que podem ser obtidos por esse processo e que resultam na circunferência, que é a cônica definida na intersecção de um plano que atravessa a superfície de um cone paralelamente à base do mesmo, elipse, que é a cônica definida na interseção de um plano que atravessa a superfície de um cone, parábola, que é a cônica também na intersecção de um plano na superfície de um cone.
Então, isso foi uma preocupação. Outra coisa, todo o conteúdo vai estar encadeado. Eu não acredito nisso, como vocês podem ver, meu cachorro resolveu participar da reunião. O conteúdo é sempre encadeado, então aqui ele estaria nas cônicas, o que vem depois da introdução, vem circunferência, obviamente ele pode vir por aqui ou ele pode ir pedindo o próximo e ele vai pegando o próximo material. Como vocês veem, também é lido, e aqui tem o conteúdo, ele vai progredindo. Uma coisa importante de comentar é que cada vez que ele interage com o sistema, isso é anotado para ele numa ficha que o professor tem acesso. Então, o professor sabe se ele viu, quantas vezes ele viu, se ele assistiu um vídeo completamente ou não, porque isso sempre nos dá indício daquilo que, eventualmente, o aluno pode ter dúvida. Então, a gente achou importante ter esse rastreamento de tudo que ele faz e como ele faz. Isso pode ajudar muito no diagnóstico. Aqui vocês vejam que, quando eu entrei em elipse, ele já começa a me mostrar algumas coisas, como o que é relacionado a isso. Então, existe todo um interrelacionamento das aulas, dos conteúdos, do glossário, de tudo que o sistema possui, né, do EduRoot, do nosso acervo digital. Então, para responder aquela famosa pergunta do aluno, mas isso serve para quê? Então, ele já tem uma indicação de onde aquilo é aplicado. Então, por exemplo, se ele clicar aqui em lei de Kepler, ele vai ver lei de Kepler. Aí, mas lei de Kepler está relacionado com as elipses que ele estava vendo, está relacionado com a revolução científica na história, né, com os movimentos da Terra, com as marés, e aqui ele pode ir navegando livremente e ele vai descobrindo algumas coisas por ele mesmo, né, sem que a gente tenha que ficar mostrando. Então, aqui, movimentos da Terra, assim vai. E cada assunto puxa assuntos relacionados. Nós também colocamos um assistente. Esse assistente é um robô. Ele ainda não está plenamente programado, mas a ideia é que ele possa fazer perguntas do tipo: o que é tal coisa, quem foi tal coisa, qual a fórmula de tal coisa, ou não entendia alguma coisa e ele falar para o aluno, olha, então dá uma olhada nisso, nisso e nisso. Esta janelinha, infelizmente, ela não está plenamente funcional. Ela apresentaria uma resposta para o aluno no meio não, né? Em destaque. Essa janela, como todo conteúdo do acervo, pode ter um vídeo, pode ter um áudio, pode ter um link, pode ter o que for. Né? A gente se preocupou bastante com isso de poder perguntar a ele da forma mais natural possível. Nós, inclusive, desenvolvemos também, ainda está em teste, mas já funcional, nós temos até uma skill que funciona com a Alexa. Então, eu posso perguntar diretamente a Alexa alguma coisa e ela me responde. Eu estou falando com vocês através de uma, eu vou arriscar fazer uma pergunta para ela. Eco, tenho dúvida.
O que você quer saber?
O que é magma?
Magma é a rocha fundida abaixo da superfície terrestre.
O que é monarquia?
Monarquia é uma forma de governo, sendo a mais antiga em vigência nos dias atuais. Em uma monarquia, o rei, rainha ou imperador, imperatriz ocupa o cargo de monarca e, geralmente, é chefe de Estado, podendo ser também chefe de governo.
Obrigado.
Até a próxima.
Então, a gente acha que essa interação um pouco mais natural, né, o sistema poder interagir dessa forma em linguagem natural, também ajuda. E na user experience do sistema, né, todo o front-end dele, é planejado para que o aluno não tenha que ficar navegando entre muitas coisas. Tudo o que ele pode precisar ou ele pode querer tem que estar alcançável rapidamente por um clique. Então, acho que isso mostra um pouco do que é a plataforma. E só aproveitando e mostrando para vocês como funciona quando ele propõe questões. Né? Por exemplo, aqui tem uma, qual é a equação reduzida da elipse, etc. Aí o aluno vem e responde, esta aqui. Não, está incorreto e a solução é apresentada para ele. Novamente, pode ser apresentada por vídeo, pode ser apresentada por áudio, por texto, seja o que for. E se ele, por acaso, respondeu incorreto e depois ele vem, refaz e acerta, clica na correta, isso é registrado naquela ficha que é mantida dele para que o professor saiba que ele errou alguma coisa, porque testes, né, senão vocês sabem, é fácil, eu chuto as 4 alternativas e, obviamente, em algum momento eu acerto. Tá? Há algo mais que eu possa mostrar? Acho que dá para ter uma ideia geral boa, né? Oswaldo, agora é o seu que está mutado.
This is a very quick show of how we think our platform should act. Our platform should act like a teacher for the student that is working with the platform. So the platform is able to understand Portuguese, can respond into Portuguese, can read texts, can look exactly what the student went through during his learning process and automatically report this to the teacher. So his teacher will know exactly what was the process he went through, how he answered the quizzes and did the exercise, did the homework, how he is participating in a group work, so that the teacher can really give attention to each student, knowing exactly the data that was collected by the system to access and to provide the best learning experience to each one. This is basically our platform.
Thank you for sharing. And Adriana, thank you for sharing. That was a beautiful presentation. And I can imagine how that would fit directly into a blended learning arc. So I thought my presentation and your presentation were very cooperative with each other. I have to leave now. My son is being dropped off by the school bus in 3 minutes, so I have to run. But I am so glad to meet each one of you and congratulate you on your beautiful platform and this very modern vision that you have for educating Brazilian youth. You will be an important part of the ecosystem there. So thank you for allowing me to see it and share some thoughts with you today. I hope you will continue to push for new mindsets in your country, and that together we will create a world where every student can learn regardless of circumstance. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Have a good night.
You too.
Thank you, Heather, for the opportunity to have you here. Obrigado, pessoal, pela presença de todos. Foi um prazer recebê-los. E conte conosco, estamos à disposição para conversar, tirar dúvidas, né? Rafael, vou direcionar a sua pergunta a Heather por e-mail, tá? Para que, de repente, ela possa prover algum tipo de feedback para a gente, tá bem?
Se alguém tem alguma pergunta para o Fábio, para a gente está